Okay, so we are looking today at how to answer Literature Paper 2, the Unseen Poetry question, which is the C2 question, which is the last question in the paper, and this question is worth 8 marks. So let's take another look at that. So this exam is really tough. By the time you get to this question, which is all the way down here, you will have already answered a question on an Inspector course for 45 minutes, and a question on power and conflict poetry for 45 minutes, and already another question on another unseen poem for 30 minutes. And then you'll get to this paper. And really, this paper is, and I always say this is more like a marathon than a sprint. And it's really tempting by the time you get down to here to give up. However, it is so important that you don't, because 8 marks for lots of us is the difference between 2 grades. 8 marks last year was the difference between a grade 4 and a grade 5. So if you're going for those key grades, it is so important to answer this question and give yourself enough time. Looking back at this paper, it is so important, again, to plan your timings. Okay. So let's take a little look at this question. Now, this question is all about something called methods. We talk a lot about methods in English language, but methods we can talk about in English literature as well. And by methods in poetry, they kind of fall into 2 different categories. The first one is structure, so anything to do with its form. So, for example, sonnet form, the rhyme scheme, the rhythm of the poem, whether it's in first person, second person, whether the poem uses enjambment, and the number of stanzas. And then the other type of methods that you should be expected to look at is language. So similes, metaphors, extended metaphors, repetition, anaphora, imagery, semantic field, word choice, sentence types, punctuation, and so many more. Now, the thing to say on this again is we're not going to teach you this in this video. If you don't know these techniques, you must revise. So I'm going to go through the steps to answer the question. The first 2 steps I'm going to show you is where you have to read through the second question, highlight and annotate the keywords. It is so important that we do that we focus on keywords, because if we don't answer the question and we miss the question focus, we're going to lose out on those valuable marks. So the second step is to look at the first poem again. Now, you will have already answered a question on this poem, so you'll know it really well. In your own words, you're going to sum up your answer to the second question focus, and you're going to remind yourself of structural methods or features and language features that are used, really importantly linked to the question focus. So let's take a look again. So here we go. This is 27-2. It's worth 8 marks. I'm going to spend around 15 or 10 to 15 minutes on it. Ideally 15, but if I'm running out of time, 10 is enough to do a really good answer. So let's take a look at the question focus. So it says, in both today and autumn, the speakers describe attitudes towards the seasons. What are the similarities and or differences between the methods the poets use to present these attitudes? Okay, so I'm just looking at my question focus. Methods, I know I can talk about language or structure. Just going to mark that on to remind myself. And then I've got similarities and or differences between the methods the poets use to present these attitudes. Now, from my English language study, I know that attitudes, another word for attitudes is maybe feelings, viewpoint, or opinion. Okay, so basically I'm thinking, how do these speakers feel about the season that they describe? So I'm actually going to go back first of all to the first poem that I've read, which was here listed in 27-1, which was the autumn poem. So let me take another look at that. Now, you will already have loads of notes on your poem. Mine's blank, but yours will be full of ideas from when you answered this question, the 24-mark question for 27-1. So what I need to do, let me just go back to my steps, is just check. I'm going to plan out 1 structural feature and 1 language feature that is used, really importantly, linking to the question focus. Okay, right then, let's take a little look. So going back to autumn, I remember the first thing that I did when I looked at this poem for the first time was I talked about the rhyme scheme, and I identified that it was in free verse. Okay. And I also identified enjambment. Okay, so that's my structure. As simple as that. I don't need to pick loads. That's my structure. Let me just check my step. Just one language feature that they use. So I'm thinking about the attitudes to, here we go, the attitudes towards the seasons. And I remember that those structural techniques I said created a sense of chaos and a lack of control, maybe a sense of fear. Now a language feature I'm going to pick out, actually I remember when I looked at this, actually I thought that there were some positive elements of autumn as well. So I'm going to see the speaker's attitude. It might be a scary thing, autumn, but I'm also going to pick out this quote, glows red with a quiet rage. I'm going to pick out glows red particularly. And I'm going to say actually potentially that suggests that autumn is maybe beautiful, maybe has some positive traits. So I'm going to talk about glows red. I'm going to say that's colour imagery. And I'm going to talk about the word glows, maybe suggests like a warmth. But also, because I need to show multiple interpretations, red still makes me think of a danger. Alright, that's enough. Because I've already written about this poem already. So, really briefly, I'm just going to turn that into a plan. So I need to just make notes. And I might just remind myself what my question focus is at the top. So attitudes to the season. I'm going to make sure my techniques, my method link to that idea. So structure, I said it is in free verse and it uses enjambment. So let's take a look at what I wrote. I said it uses enjambment, it uses free verse. And really important, I think about why they've been used. So it reflects the speaker's attitude. So I'm using the words of the question focus there towards the season as chaotic. And I've said that the enjambment and the free verse is used to reflect the lack of control, the fear and the sense of change. And then language, my method is light imagery. Here's my quote, glows red. And I've just thought about some of the connotations. So I'm going to talk about their attitude is that maybe autumn does have some positivity about it. And red is a warm colour, but it's also sinister, which suggests that maybe autumn is a bit of a kind of a multi-layered season. Alright, so that's poem 1. So now all I do is do exactly the same with the second poem. Now I'm going to spend a little bit longer on this because I haven't read this yet. So I'm going to go through this in a bit more detail. So it says, read through the second poem, make notes about the structure, language and meaning of the poem, linked to the question focus, of course, which is the attitudes to the season. So let's take a look. Today, if ever there were a spring day so perfect. Okay, so straight away I've spotted spring is the season that I'm looking at, and spring day so perfect. Now I'm going to start thinking straight away, is that positive, negative? I've spotted a positive. So uplifted by a warm intermittent breeze. Uplifted makes me think of joy. Sorry. Then it made you want to throw open all the windows in the house and unlatch. Oh, what have I spotted there? House and. We're still in one sentence. That technique, we've got some enjambment here. Okay. Let me just pause while I'm thinking about structure. I'm just going to look at rhyme. If ever the spring day said perfect, got A. So uplifted by a warm intermittent breeze, got B. Then it made you want to throw all the windows in the house. Cage, jam, paths. Okay. I've got free verse here. So I've got no rhyme. Let me just check. Yeah, no rhymes at all in this poem, so I've got free verse all the way through. Great, let me keep going then. Spring day so perfect, so uplifted by a warm intermittent breeze, and it made you want to throw open all the windows in the house and unlatch the door to the canary's cage. Indeed, rip the little door from its jamb. I'm going to check at the bottom the size of the doorway or opening. A day when the cool brick paths and the garden bursting with peonies seemed so etched in sunlight. Okay, I'm just going to look at some of these quotes. So I like these verbs: throw open all the windows in the house. If you throw something, it's kind of a very strong movement, a sense of freedom. If you throw open your arms, you've got a real sense of joy. And latch the door to the canary's cage. Rip the little door from its jamb. Okay, rip makes me think of kind of an urgency. If you rip something, it's usually because you're desperate. So if I think about the attitude to spring, I've already got the idea of perfect. Actually, that shows that they really want to embrace spring. Really feel the need to kind of experience it. Okay, let's keep going. A day when the cool brick paths and the garden bursting with peonies. Garden bursting. Gardens can't actually burst. I'm thinking about methods. Got a metaphor. And peonies, I'm just going to check our flowers. So the garden bursting, I'm going to zoom in on that word bursting maybe. Seems so etched in sunlight. Oh, I like this. This is reminding me of the other poem that I picked out, Autumn. So I've got some light imagery again. I need to go through this process and read the whole thing so that I'm happy with what I'm doing, but I've spotted light imagery there that I might come back to. A hammer to the glass paperweight on the living room end table, releasing the inhabitants from their snow-covered cottage. Oh, okay, I've got a paperweight. Now, I know what a paperweight is. It's like a glass object that people often have, like a snow globe. And actually, I think this is a metaphor, because this isn't literally saying smash open a paperweight. It's saying kind of we should release people from their snow. So release people from winter. Maybe we've got that sense of like a new beginning. Spring is like a time of change. And already I've said kind of freedom here. Freedom, joy. Okay. They could walk out holding hands and squinting into this larger dome of blue and white. Well, today is just that kind of day. Okay, I've got some nice colours here. Blue. Oh, my pen's not working. Blue, white. Anyway, I'll zoom in on the techniques, on the colour imagery there. All right. So, looking again at the plan. Now all I need to do is review everything. So I can't write out everything because I've only got 10 minutes. So I'm going to pick some things that are similar and different. So I'm going to focus on similarities and differences. So I think I'm going to talk about the free verse Neon John Mont. So that's similar to Autumn. And I'm going to also talk about the light imagery. If I've got time, I might talk about some of those metaphors as well. Maybe the metaphor about the snow globe. I really like that. Okay, so now step 4, plan out my ideas for the second poem, plan out one structural feature, one language feature that they use and why, link to the question focus, and then I write for around 10 minutes because I've spent about 5 minutes planning. So here is my plan now for poem 2, and you can see that I've tried to think about similarities and differences. So for structure, I said it also uses on John Mont, it's also free verse, so I'm trying to kind of make those connections. But I've said here it's really important that we look at how it reflects the freedom that spring brings. Oh, then my pen's working now. And this had said a different why, so I need to think about why it's been used. And also I picked another similarly light imagery. My quote is the garden etched in sunlight, and I'm going to zoom in on the word sunlight, which brings joy, positivity, life, newness and happiness, okay? So I'm thinking about similar techniques. I could also look at different techniques, so I might just pick 2 different techniques and say that they're different, which is fine, but I've spotted a similarity, so I'm going to go with that. So now all I need to do is turn it into a piece of writing. Now this took me, honestly, 10 minutes, and it gets 8 out of 8. I start with structure, so what I need to do is explain one structural method used in the first poem, explain why it's been used, link back to the question focus. Then explain the structural method used in the second poem, explain why it's been used, and all the way through I'm going to use some comparative phrases. So for example, similarly, in contrast, to show how the ideas are similar or different. Okay, so I'm looking at the first poem and why, link back to the question focus, and here. Okay, so let's take a look. I'll read it to you as it comes up on the screen. So, firstly, in terms of structure, Autumn uses free verse and on John Mont to reflect the chaos that the season of autumn brings, because the poet's attitude towards autumn is that it's a time of change with little structure or control. Really, really important. I've started with the poem Autumn, which is my first one. I've named some techniques, And I've linked it back to the question focus because the poet's attitude towards autumn is that it's a time of change. And I talked about chaos there as well. Okay, that's one sentence. Then I'm going to do the same with the second poem. Here we go. Similarly, today also uses free verse. However, unlike autumn, the free verse in this poem could reflect the poet's view of spring as a time of freedom and joy where people can leave the trappings of winter behind them to enjoy nature. Okay, so I picked out a similarity, I named another technique, but then I talked about a different effect because looking at my plan, it's not the same effect. Okay, so looking back here, it's not the same effect, it's very different. The poet's view of spring is a time of freedom and joy. Okay, then what I need to do, so there's my structure paragraph just up there, is exactly the same for language. So I'm going to explain one language method used in the poem, including evidence, and I'm going to explain why it's been used, linking back to the question focus. And then I'm going to explain another, language feature used in the second poem, including evidence, explain why it's been used. And again, I'm going to use some of those comparative phrases, similarly in contrast, to show how the methods are similar or different. So let's take a look. Here's what I wrote for poem 1. Secondly, in terms of language, in today, so start with the other poem, that's okay. The poet uses light imagery to show that the season of spring is a joyful and positive time of year. The poet portrays, here comes my evidence, how the garden seems so etched in sunlight. This illustrates how beautiful the different seasons make the natural world look. The noun sunlight, so I'm zooming in on a word, suggests to the reader that the seasons bring joy and happiness, and it creates an image in their mind of a perfect idyllic scene. Second poem, here we go. Likewise, in autumn, the poet also uses light imagery to suggest that autumn has positive traits. The poet describes a sky that glows red. This also shows the reader that autumn brings out positivity and the beauty of nature. Red is sometimes associated with love or passion, which alludes to the fact that the speaker really enjoys autumn because of the colour and liveliness it brings with it. However, in contrast to today, red may also have connotations of danger, which may suggest that the poet views autumn as a time of danger and chaos as well as beauty. So I'm trying, even though I've picked out a similarity, I'm trying to pick out a different kind of effect. Okay, so I've actually done a second interpretation here, which will get you loads of marks. So in total then, this response gets 8 out of 8. It's really easy to do, and I know that you're going to do a great job of this question. So the moral of this is, don't forget about this question. It's a really good chance for you to show off your skills. Best of luck.